with another edition of Gardenside Chat on this windy Thursday afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. Today is going to be a really timely topic. We're going to talk about how to try to keep your young plants warm. Yesterday we experienced a record high. It was a beautiful summery day, but if anyone's been outside today, you can tell that it's definitely not the same, and the temperature is actually dropping. I just put on my ear warmer because the temperature is getting a little chilly for me to just be standing here. The Weather Association has issued a frost warning for tomorrow morning. And so I think a lot of new gardeners are probably sitting around thinking like, oh my gosh, I just planted my garden. What am I going to do with all my young plants with the temperature drop so severely over just the course of 36, 48 hours? So that's what the topic is going to be today. And I'm going to show you a few things, kind of give you a little pep talk, and then you can replicate them at home, and hopefully everyone's garden sees us through this temperature drop that we're going to experience. Okay, first thing is first. What are the plants that might be growing in your garden that aren't going to be able to handle this temperature drop? Well, if you have been following these Gardenside Chats, you know you should rest comfortably in that everything we have planted, onions, and talked about onions, lettuce, carrots, kale, nasturtiums, all of those are cold hardy. So all of those will live through a temperature drop like this. In fact, like the lettuce would probably have a harder time with yesterday's high than with like this evening's low. So if you've only planted cool season crops, you should be good. Now that isn't to say they wouldn't appreciate being covered, but they will live uncovered through this, temperature drop, but even if it goes below freezing. So you don't really have to do anything if you have only cool season stuff outside. Now, if you want to keep those covered anyway, just to keep them growing a little bit faster, that's totally great and good for you. If you have anything that's a little more tender, you definitely want to cover it because there's a lot of things that yesterday's weather might have encouraged you to do planting wise that might not live through this cold drop. So if you planted anything like beans, if you planted cucumbers, squash, if you have your tomatoes out for some reason right now, none of that would make it through such a cold evening, cold morning. So you definitely want to either get those things back inside or cover them and hope for the best. So how do you cover them? Well, one thing that's really important, it might seem counterintuitive, is you want to water everything. So it's really windy out today, so it's drying out what is kind of already wet outside, but you want to make sure your plants have enough moisture around their roots and also are wet on their leaves. So I am going to demonstrate. I've got my hose right here on these cabbage plants. So I've got some cabbage plants that are going through a little bit of transplant shock. They've got some insect damage, but more or less they're doing happy. They're doing well. So you can kind of tell by looking at the soil, it's still got a good amount of moisture. But I just want to get the plant itself wet and also just make sure that it has enough water around it. So being cold and being dry are kind of like the two worst things to do. So kind of giving them a nice long drink, spraying off the leaves will work. So you can do this with your plants. If you have flowers outside, you can try doing with the flowers too, like daffodils or blossoms on any trees. We have apple trees that are in the peak of blooming right now, and so if I really wanted to try to protect those blooms, I'd try to hose the tree down. I'm personally probably not going to do that. I think that the apple flowers will probably make it through this cold weather just fine. But water will freeze when the temperature drops, and freezing, it keeps the plant leaves a little warmer. So it seems really counterintuitive, but that is one kind of trick to try to get tender things through a cold drop, a cold spell. So although these cabbages aren't considered tender by any means, if I really wanted to baby them and, you know, keep them, you know, on the trajectory to growing nice big heads of cabbage for me to eat later, I would rinse them off like I just did. Make sure their roots have enough water and the leaves have enough water. So as you can see, this cabbage has nice wet leaves. They have very waxy leaves, so it kind of like beads up, but that's the best I can do. And then I have a 5-gallon bucket or some other appropriately sized container that's big enough to go entirely over the plant. Ideally, you don't want any of the leaves or anything touching the bucket because that could like kind of what we call burn the leaves. Like if the outside of the bucket gets really cold and there's a leaf touching the inside, it could also get really cold. In some cases that's really hard to do, so just if you're going this route, just try your best. So anyway, I'm just gonna put the bucket right over, and then I'm gonna weight that down with a rock, because as you know, it's really windy out and the bucket would just blow away if you don't have a rock on it. Pots, big pots are great for this. Buckets, of course. Anything that you could find to turn upside down and put over your plant would work just fine. So then tomorrow morning, or whenever this cold snap is over, I would come out, take the rock off, and take the bucket off. So this would just be for the evening because you want to make sure that your plant gets the sunlight. You don't want to starve your plant of sunlight. Okay, so that's a good trick if you have like young plants growing in your garden. But what if you have like a row of really small plants? What do you do? A bucket wouldn't really work in that scenario. So let's go kind of over here and talk about what you can do in that scenario. Okay, so over here we got some baby bok choy and some baby collard greens. This one is the bok choy. The collard greens are over here. They're getting a little, the bok choy especially has some flea beetle damage, which is why it's got the white powder on it. The white powder is diatomaceous earth, and it's supposed to kill the flea beetles. The flea beetle damage are these little tiny shotgun holes. So anyway, neither here nor there. That's just explaining why they look like that. So again, bok choy, collards, definitely cold hardy. So personally, I'm not super concerned about it, but I would do the same thing. I would water them, make sure the leaves are wet, make sure the young roots have enough moisture to kind of make sure they don't dry out. Especially since today's windy, because the cold front's blowing in, it can really dry some stuff out. So you just want to make sure that everything is nice and wet. Alright, that's probably good. And then I have a collection of like old sheets. Everyone's got something like that in their house. So I just pulled this old sheet out of where I keep my old sheets. And so what I would do, again, ideally, since this is a dark sheet, I would just do this at night. I just kind of figure out how big I want it to be. And then I'm just going to lay it over. And this is great because it's really windy out, so you really need to weight it down. So I brought some bricks over as well. I got some bricks. I've got other stuff planted that hasn't come up yet, so I don't want to put the bricks down in the bed. So anyway, I would just weight the corners down, something like that. And then I'll put the other two over here just so that the sheet doesn't blow away. Voila. So that is, although this is permeable, like any moisture could go right through the sheet, this is enough protection that any frost or anything should protect the plants just a little bit. So again, just like the bucket, I would do this the night before the low is supposed to come, so I'd probably do this maybe tomorrow night, and then the next morning, once it warms up a little bit, I would come out and take them off so the plants could see the sunlight again. And then if it's supposed to dip down again, I would come back out and put the buckets and the sheets back over it. All right. So what would you do if maybe you don't have a sheet, maybe you don't have some buckets or containers? Another thing I use is you could use mulch. So in this case, instead of using a sheet, I could have just got out some of my bags of leaves or some straw bales and put the mulch around the plants and cover the plants up and then kind of lightly rake the mulch off. That's a little more challenging because you could accidentally kill young plant by raking the mulch off, but that's another thing that will provide a thermal barrier between the plant and the cold air. So mulch is definitely an appropriate method to try to keep your plants nice and warm and free from the frost. So yeah, those are a few tricks to keep your plants nice and cozy on these cold nights that are forecast. If you have started any plants in your house and you're in the process of hardening them off, I would definitely bring those in the next few evenings. I would only leave them outside if they were very hardened off. So if they were like very used to being whipped around by the wind or kind of stressed a little bit, but if you'd only been taking them out 1 or 2 days, I would bring them back inside because this will be a very big shock from going from like your house in a climate controlled environment to, you know, the temperature dropping to below 30. So just make sure that you kind of think about all those plants that you might have started and are thinking about bringing out. Another thing I will throw out there is if you live in the city of Columbia, there's a good chance that your low won't hit as low as is projected because we live in a mid-sized city, so there is the urban heat island effect. So all the concrete and the roads and the houses really absorb a lot of heat and keep things a little bit warmer. So we might not see the lows that are predicted, which if you're concerned about like your plants seeing this cold snap through is a good thing. It might not get as cold as is projected. But if you're concerned about it and you want to make sure that your little potatoes that have stuck out of the ground like our ones at the farm are doing make it through this cold snap, just cover them with a bucket, a sheet, some mulch, and they should be just fine. Make sure that they're nice and moist before you do any of that, and then you'll have done all that you can do to save them from this cold spell. So that's it, pretty short and sweet, pretty simple. Let us know if you have any comments or questions. We'd love to help you kind of like navigate this if this is your first time going through kind of like the crazy temperature shifts in your first spring of gardening. Or if you have any other content that you'd like us to cover, just let us know and we'll incorporate it into our schedule. Please like, plant, and subscribe to see more future content, or visit our website, columbiaurbanag.org, to learn about our mission and all of our projects around town. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope your garden's doing well. Take care.